And now let's take a look at our development process. The first thing that we'll do is we'll inject the helper class JSON mapper, and then we'll add support for the patch mapping request method. And then we'll apply the patch payload to the employee. Okay, getting started here with step 1 of injecting a helper class JSON mapper. Now, JSON mapper is a helper class in the Jackson library for JSON processing. The JSON mapper provides the following support. It allows you to convert Java objects to JSON and vice versa. It also allows merging of JSON nodes, which is very useful for patching. And it also provides type safety for conversions going between Java and JSON. And a really nice thing about this is that when you're using Spring Boot, the JSON mapper is pre-configured, so you can actually inject it into any of your Spring components. And now let's go ahead and look at the coding. And then for injecting the helper class JSON mapper, notice our import up top. This shows that this helper class JSON mapper is from the Jackson library. We have our normal REST controller code. We set up a private field for JSON mapper. And then in our constructor, we make use of constructor injection. We simply add the parameter for JSON mapper. And again, remember, JSON mapper is auto-configured by Spring Boot for JSON processing. And we can simply inject this into any of our components like our REST controller. We simply do our normal assignments. And then we have a handle here or a reference to the JSON mapper. And we'll use it a little bit later in some of the other coding, but at least we have it. We're just kind of setting things up for right now. And then in step 2, we're going to add support for the patch mapping request method. In our coding here, we make use of the annotation patch mapping. We give /employee/employee ID. Remember, we're passing the employee ID as a path variable. We go ahead and create our method here for patch employee. We make use of the annotation path variable to bind that path variable to the parameter here, int employee ID. We also make use of the request body annotation. And then we bind this to a map, string, objects, and that's our patch payload. So basically that JSON data come in as a map of key value pairs. In our coding here, the first thing we do is we retrieve that employee from the database. If we didn't find that employee, if temp employee equals null, we simply throw an exception, hey, employee ID not found. And we also want to add another check here. In our application, the ID field is not allowed in the payload. We do not want to change the primary key. So that's one thing that they can't update. All right. We want to preserve the integrity of our primary key. So we will not allow them to change the ID because it causes a lot of other bad issues on the backend database here. Here, I simply check. I'll say if the patch payload that contains key ID, we throw an exception, employee ID not allowed in the request body. And then moving on down, we make a call to this method update value. So we make the call and then we pass in the temp employee and the patch payload. And we basically want to patch that employee or apply the partial updates to that employee based on the information that came in from that patch payload. And we assign it to a patch employee over on the left-hand side. And then once that employee is patched, then we simply say employee service.save to actually save that to the database. And then we return the database version of that employee. Now looking at the coding here, we have our partial update where we only want to update the email address. So here I have patch, I give /API/employee/5. So that's employee ID number 5. The email goes through, does everything on the back end. And then notice here again how the partial updates are applied correctly. We only apply the patch to that email address and everything works out as desired. So that's kind of like our desired case as far as what we wanted. We saw all of the coding here for how to make this happen, and we'll kind of apply this in some of the upcoming videos. But one thing I want to mention here is that the approach that we showed in the previous slides, it covers the majority of the use cases for partial updates. So if you simply need to update a field like a first name or update an email address or whatever, any type of partial update, that's fine. You can use the approach that I showed here. However, if you have some complex use cases, like you have some deeply nested JSON entities, or you need to add, remove, copy fields, apply tester fields, if you need to move or manipulate array elements,
or any type of like transformations or data enrichment, then you may want to look at using some of the RFCs for patch. So there's an RFC 6902, it's the JSON patch. There's also RFC 7386, the JSON merge patch. You can go to the links I have here on the slide to kind of get details on each one of those. And if you want to see a Java implementation of these RFCs, then you can make use of the JSON patch project, which is available on GitHub at the link that I have here on the slide. So those are some of the complex use cases. But again, what we've covered so far will cover the majority of the normal cases that you use or encounter in your applications. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and move into the next video and let's start writing some code.